Welcome back to Deathly Curious Australia, where the past refuses to rest. I'm Monique and welcome to episode 12 and the beginning of season 2. Over the past few weeks, while we've had a little break from our regular episodes, I haven't been sitting still. Behind the scenes, I've been researching, writing and working on a big project that I'm incredibly excited to share with you when the time is right. But today we're kicking off season 2 exactly where I wanted to begin, at one of Australia's most fascinating, historic and reportedly haunted locations. I've got to admit, it feels really good to be sitting behind this microphone again. Creating this podcast has become one of my favourite things to do each week. Well, besides actually getting out and investigating, of course. The reality is I don't get to investigate anywhere near as often as I'd like. Life has a habit of getting in the way, Investigations take planning, and it's not always as simple as grabbing a camera and heading off for the weekend. So this podcast has become a really special place for me. It's where I reconnect with something I love. I disappear down research rabbit holes, chat with guides, historians, fellow investigators, and then I get to sit down behind this microphone and share those stories with you all. And honestly, that's become pretty special. One of my favourite things is hearing from listeners who tell me an episode made them stop and think. Not because they agreed with everything I said, but because it encouraged them to explore their own ideas, ask their own questions, and come to their own conclusions. Because if I've inspired your curiosity, then I've achieved exactly what I set out to do. So, whether you've been with me since episode 1 or you've only just discovered the podcast, thank you. I'm really glad you're here. This season, we're heading back to some incredible haunted locations, introducing Deathly Curious True Crime Files, sitting down with some fantastic guests in spotlight episodes, and whenever a story develops that simply can't wait, I'll bring you a Deathly Curious dispatch so we can explore it together. If you've listened before, you'll know I investigate because I'm fascinated by the possibility that there's more to our existence than what we currently understand. I've had enough experiences over the years to know there's something worth exploring, and every investigation gives us another opportunity to learn a little more. Sometimes I walk away with more questions than answers, and strangely enough, I'm okay with that, because I don't think we've asked all the questions yet. That's exactly what keeps drawing me back, and it's exactly what drew me to Quarantine Station. Like a lot of investigators, I've heard the stories long before I ever set foot there. People talk about shadow figures, unexplained voices, footsteps in empty buildings, rooms that seem to affect people in completely different ways. It has a reputation that few locations in Australia can match. So naturally, I wanted to experience it for myself and have done a few times. What I didn't expect was how much the history would shape the way I experienced that place. The first time I visited the Quarantine Station, I really wasn't sure what to expect. As we made our way through the gates, the first thing that struck me wasn't the buildings, it was the setting. Quarantine Station sits on North Head overlooking Sydney Harbour, and it's absolutely beautiful. The views are incredible. The harbour stretches out in front of you, there's bushland all around, and for a moment it's easy to forget why this place exists at all. I've got to admit, that surprised me. I'd arrived expecting the reputation to hit me the moment I stepped onto the grounds. Instead, the place felt calm, peaceful. If someone had brought me there without telling me where I was, I don't think my first thought would have been, this is one of Australia's most haunted locations. But that's the funny thing about places like this. First impressions only tell part of the story. The more time I spend investigating a location, the more I realise you can't separate the atmosphere from the history. And that's something Quarantine Station reminded me of almost immediately. Before we talk about quarantine, before we talk about the paranormal experiences people report there, or even the history most people know, I think it's important to acknowledge that this place has a much longer story. Long before European settlement, this headland, known traditionally as Karangel, was a place of deep cultural and spiritual significance for the Gayamagal people, the traditional custodians of this part of Sydney Harbour. For thousands of years, they cared for country, gathered there, shared knowledge, and maintained a connection to this land that continues today. I think that's something worth remembering, because every place has layers of history, and Quarantine Station is no exception. One chapter in this place's long history began in 1828, when North Head was first used as a quarantine site after a ship carrying smallpox was detained there. A permanent quarantine station followed a few years later, and over the next century and a half, thousands of people would pass through these gates in circumstances they never expected. Whenever I visit a place like this, I always find myself wondering the same thing. What must it have been like to arrive here? Not as a visitor, but as someone stepping off a ship after weeks or even months at sea. You can finally see Sydney after you've made it, or at least you think you have. Then everything changes. Instead of beginning the next chapter of your life, you're told to wait. If there were concerns about illness on board a ship, passengers could be brought ashore here while doctors determined whether it was safe for them to continue into Sydney. For some, that wait was relatively short. For others, it stretched into weeks. And sadly, not everyone who arrived here would leave. Over the years, people arriving here faced outbreaks of diseases including smallpox, bubonic plague, typhus, and during that 1918 influenza pandemic, what became known as the Spanish flu. Each outbreak left its own mark on this place. Behind every number was a person, someone with family waiting, someone chasing a new beginning, hoping tomorrow would bring better news. More than 500 people are believed to have died here, and many were buried on North Head, not far from where they had hoped to begin a new chapter of their lives. Possibly more people. They just don't have all the records. So I've got to admit that really stayed with me. It's easy to walk through old buildings and think of them simply as history. It's much harder when you stop and remember that every room, every path, and every view across the harbour was once part of someone's real life. Someone stood exactly where we're standing. Someone waited there. Some watched ships come and go, wondering when it would finally be their turn. And someone else never got that chance. I think that's one of the reasons Quarantine Station feels different to me. Yes, the paranormal is what first drew me here. It usually is. But once I understood what had happened on these grounds, I found myself looking at the place through completely different eyes. The history didn't replace the paranormal. It gave it depth. Because behind every unexplained story, there's a human side. And that's something I never want to lose sight of. By this point, I'd stopped thinking about Quarantine Station as simply one of Australia's most well-known haunted locations. I was thinking about the people, their stories, the lives that unfolded here. But I was still curious because alongside the history, Quarantine Station has built a reputation that continues to draw investigators, historians, and curious visitors from all over the country. People talk about hearing footsteps, seeing shadowy figures, hearing voices when no one else is around. Others describe an overwhelming feeling that they're not alone. I've heard these stories for years. Some came from investigators, others came from people who had no interest in the paranormal at all. And that's what I find interesting. The experiences people describe are often completely different, but they all happened here. As we explored different parts of the station, from the hospital precinct to the shower blocks and the accommodation buildings, it became obvious that almost everyone had a different story, a different moment, a different place that stayed with them. So I wanted to hear from someone who knows Quarantine Station far better than I ever could. Someone who spent countless hours walking these grounds, sharing its history and listening to the experiences of visitors. I asked a simple question. After spending so much time here, what's something you've personally experienced or noticed that you still can't explain?
After spending 11 years as a ghost tour guide at the Quarantine Station, I've experienced things that I still really struggle to explain. I've seen shadow figures where there shouldn't be anyone standing. I've even felt what seemed like unseen hands brush past me when there's no one there. And there have been moments during the investigation tours where everything I thought I really understood just didn't seem to apply. But strangely, those really aren't the experiences that stick with me the most. What really stays with me are the moments when I watch other people experience something for themselves. You can see it happen in real time. Their expression changes, they might go really quiet, sometimes they freeze completely. I've seen people get scratched, I've seen people pass out, and I've also seen people get physically sick. I've watched people react to things that they simply cannot explain. And some of those encounters have been generally terrifying to witness. Whether it's fear, shock, or overwhelming emotion, these reactions are real. After all these years, I can honestly say I still can't tell you exactly what happens. I only know that sometimes the Quarantine Station seems to leave people with questions they'll carry long after they've walked through that front gate.
Listening to Mel's answer, I found myself thinking about my own experiences here. And there were two moments in particular that I've never forgotten. The first experience happened in a building many people know as the Gravedigger's Cottage, although it's more accurately recognised as the doctor's residence. Whatever name you know it by, it's the place that stayed with me more than anywhere else at Quarantine Station. I've been inside that building more than once, and every visit has left me with exactly the same feeling. Not fear, just a shift. It's difficult to explain, but the atmosphere feels heavier, almost as though you stepped into a completely different space. The first time I walked through the doorway, I became incredibly nauseous. It happened so quickly that I had to step back outside for a few minutes. Once I felt okay again, I went back in, and almost immediately the nausea returned. Now, old buildings can be musty, they can be hot. Sometimes they simply don't feel particularly pleasant to be in. I'm well aware of that. But this felt different. The speed with which it came on was what caught my attention. Does that automatically mean it was paranormal? No, I don't think it's responsible to jump to that conclusion, but I also don't think we should dismiss every unusual experience simply because we can't immediately explain it. That's where I find myself most comfortable, acknowledging what happened, being honest about what I experienced, and also being honest enough to say, I don't know why it happened. The second experience happened later in the evening inside the older hospital. Anthony, Mel and I had set up some of our equipment, including a music box, a REM pod, a couple of cat balls, and we were simply observing what might happen. The music box had been placed on one of those old hospital beds. It was facing a cupboard with the doorway leading outside between the two. Before anything happened with the equipment, we all heard tapping. Not once, several times. First on the glass in the door, then on a nearby window. It was enough for all three of us to stop and look at each other. A short time later, the music box suddenly activated. If you've never seen one before, it projects a grid of infrared dots. When someone moves through that grid, it activates and the music starts playing. At first, we thought it might be a brief trigger, but instead the activation became stronger. Music played faster, as though something was moving directly in front of it. Then everything stopped. The room became completely silent, and almost immediately afterwards, a small stone was thrown across the room. To this day, I can't explain where it came from. It was just the three of us. We looked around, we talked through everything we just witnessed. We tried to think of a logical explanation. It seemed to come from up high, so it wouldn't make sense that someone just kicked a pebble across the floor. It was thrown. So honestly, we couldn't find a logical explanation. Would you call that poltergeist activity? I don't know. Could there be an explanation we simply haven't thought of? Absolutely. And I'm comfortable saying that too. What I can tell you is exactly what happened. Nothing more, nothing less. And it's one of those moments that has stayed with me because I still can't comfortably explain it. And maybe that's okay. Maybe every investigation doesn't have to end with certainty. Maybe sometimes the most honest thing we can say is, I experienced something unusual and I'm still trying to understand it. One of the things I've learned over the years is that no two people ever experience a place in exactly the same way. Some people walk away with incredible stories, others don't experience anything at all. And both are completely valid. I've always found that fascinating. Not because I think every experience has the same explanation, but because every person's experience is different. Here's the deal. I don't know why certain places seem to affect people more than others. I don't know why one room can leave a lasting impression on one person, while someone else walks through it without giving it a second thought. And I don't know whether that's because of history, human emotion, our own expectations, or something we simply don't understand yet. What I do know is this: Quarantine Station has stayed with me. Not because I walked away convinced I'd found all the answers, but because I walked away asking better questions. Questions about the people who passed through the gates. Questions about why some locations leave such a lasting impression long after we've gone home. As we wrap up this week's episode, I want to leave you with one final question. So, where does this sit with you? Do you think places can somehow hold on to the emotions and experiences of the people who came before us? Or does understanding the history simply change the way we experience them ourselves? If today's episode has sparked your curiosity and you'd like to see Quarantine Station for yourself, Anthony and I documented our investigation over on our YouTube channel, Date Night with the Ghost Gang. We were lucky enough to have our friend Mel join us as our guide throughout that investigation, and together we filmed a 3-part series exploring the station, its history, and our own experiences there. If you'd like to walk through the buildings we've talked about today, see the equipment sessions and come along for the investigation, I'd love for you to join us over there. Next episode, we're stepping away from the paranormal and into one of Australia's most haunting unsolved crimes, the Wanda Beach murders, a case that shocked Australia and continues to leave investigators searching for answers more than half a century later. And until next time, stay curious, because the past refuses to rest.